Welcome everybody to Topaasia webinar spring. So we had really nice webinars at this spring, and today we have a very interesting topic about the lean change management. And we are lucky to have these two experts here today with whom we can go deeper to the topic. I know some of you know already what Topaasia is, and some of you might think, what is this? What is this Topaasia, and why it's part of this webinar? So I will introduce you shortly Topaasia. And Topaasia is a dialogue tool that allows users to explore a defined topic together, generate discussions around it, and create summaries and actions. So this is Topaasia. I will tell it again. I write it down because I wanted to be short. So Topaasia is a dialogue tool that allows users to explore a defined topic together, generate discussions around it, and create summaries and actions. So this is Topaasia, software tool for dialogue. And our goal is to be the world's best tool for engagement and engaging people in organizations, development, change processes, and things like that. And last year was Topaasia's 10th year anniversary. And I think we're still going strong because we have these experts here today with us. So I think that's a good sign. And about 10 years ago when we started, it was all about teams development. We've been improving the software and developing together with the customers. And today it's more about the organizational change processes, what we're doing. And it might concern strategy implementations, value conversations, or for example, diversity practices in organization. So there's lots of change processes we can use Topaasia. And it's still used also in the team development processes. So this is one topic now we're gonna go deeper today with the lean change management. And I think this is enough about Topaasia. And now it's time to give the stage for the actual experts and stars of today. So Ken and Jason, it's your time for the spotlight.
Awesome. Thanks very much for the invite. Thanks for having us. It's funny, every time I say Topaasia, I always say it with an Italian accent because it sounds like it should be an Italian word. Topaasia. So every time I talk to people about it or play the game, I always say it that way, which is weird. But I'll give just a brief introduction of myself and then flip it over to Ken, and then we'll get going. So wrote lean change management, I guess, back in end of 2011, 2012-ish time period, and released it chapter by chapter on a platform called LeanPub. And then here we are, 11, 12 years later. And all the stuff we're going to go through today around the 5 universals is basically patterns from the work that Ken and I have been doing for a number of years. So I started as a developer in the 90s and then got into agile coaching and consulting in the, I guess, early 2000s, and then spent the greater part of the last 15 years in the org change space. So how do we take the good bits of lean and agile and design thinking and all these good practices that are typically used in software and use them in a change context? So I'll flip it over to Ken.
Hi, yeah, Ken Rickard. I work for a company called Insight, and along with Jason as well. And I've spent, well, I guess probably close to 10, maybe even 12 years it's been now, doing coaching, mainly agile coaching. But then over the past 4 or 5 years, I've definitely gotten a little bit away from agile, kind of more properly, and got into a little bit more of systems thinking. And doing some sense making stuff. And one of the books that Jason, I don't think you mentioned, was one that we wrote together, which was the big six big ideas of adaptive organizations. And so that book had a lot of sense-making stuff in it, a lot of sense-making models that we've created over the years. And yeah, so that's what I've spent a lot of my time on, just trying to build more ways for people to understand this crazy complexity in the world today. So yeah.
Cool. All right. So let me share my screen and let's get going. All right. So first, a little Easter egg. There's UC and me and another colleague of mine, Andrew, at the old co-working space in the hospital near Campy Station, working on the 𝘕𝘩𝘦 game, which I thought was really cool. And another interesting piece of trivia, if anybody ever gets asked or if we ever show up on Jeopardy, is the game in the 5 universals actually was created in Espoo, of all places. So I was out there doing some training with a local boutique consulting firm, 𝐻𝐤𝐿, CCEA. I don't think they exist anymore. I think they were bought. So this was quite a while ago. And I have some other pictures of that too, just sitting there and writing all these patterns from all the data that was collected over a number of years. So we're going to chat a little bit about the 5 universals of change. And I'll start with the name, and then Ken and I will kind of ping pong back and forth on stories of how we've used these 5 universals in a change context. So the first was calling it universals because principles is, I don't know, things can't have principles. So the one thing that has always been kind of strange for me is when you see somebody publish a framework or a method or something like that, and they say, these are the principles of this method. And for me, inanimate things cannot have principles. Those are human things. So what happens if your principles as a human conflict with the principles of the framework? So I've always kind of thought that these principles, they're created because they reflect the personality of the creator, or they're just intentionally put in place to sell stuff. So universals is things we can all understand, right? We all know how to be human. We all know what to do when a new coworker starts, or if somebody moves in next door. There's just these inherent universal qualities that humans have to be human. And that's really why they were called the universals. And they were born from, this would have been actually a lot easier today with AI to analyze this. So from 2014 to about 2020 or so, so that picture of me and UC and my colleague, that was just before everything shut down for COVID. So Andrew and I, both from Canada, my colleague, we almost got trapped. So just a month, I think, before everything shut down. But I don't know, being stuck in Helsinki wouldn't be too bad for me. So it was all these patterns over those 6 to 7 years of what were some things that were separating organizations that seemed to be doing better with change. And I know that's kind of a fuzzy way to say it, seemed to be doing better at change, because we all want change to be scientific and evidence-based, and it's impossible because human systems are not static. So you cannot repeat the same set of steps and actions in company 1 and company 2 and get the same result. There's only patterns of most of the time something like this works. So I know Ken and I talk about this quite often, that it's not black and white. It's a big spectrum of color when it comes to change. So some people are maybe a little bit put off by, this might work in your context, but we can't tell you for sure it's going to work. Do you want to add some stuff to that, Ken?
Yeah. We use might a lot. I'm often really unsure about what it is I'm saying and doing, and there's intention behind that in a way, because I don't know exactly what needs to happen, and that's the way I want to show up in that system. Now, for some people that turns people off, because they don't, they're the way they think about the world, it is very black and white, and they want expertise to show up in the room. And if they hire a consulting firm like the one that I work for, they want people to come in and know exactly what needs to be done, and they want to project that sense of confidence. And And I just don't do those things. I'm I'm trying to figure it out because the world around me is highly complex. And so if I show up in that way, some people are like, oh wow, he really is trying to figure it out as he's going along. But other people really get this sense of that they want me to show up and have everything figured out and just kind of blurt everything out. And I certainly don't do that. And so it's not for everyone. And it doesn't work in all situations. But it is the way that I prefer to show up. And more times than not, especially in complex situations, it tends to work better.
Mm-hmm. And then the thing I like about that is a stance like that I find is healthy because it helps show the people in the organization that you're there to help. Right? You're not there to give them some magic solution to a complex problem, but you're there genuinely to help them unpack the complexity so they can choose a course of action, knowing there's going to be trade-offs, knowing there's going to be consequences depending on what action is taken. And I think it's something I found with clients taking that stance. They very much appreciate, even if it is a little bit frustrating in the beginning, because
Mm-hmm.
we don't. Jerry Weinberg talks about this, or talked about this, that we don't solve problems. We just hopefully create smaller, more manageable ones when we take action on the system. So we're always sort of shifting problems around, but that's not how the business world has taught us we're supposed to behave. We're supposed to say, here's the solution. And then when that solution causes other problems, we blame whoever created the solution because it was the wrong one.
Yeah, I think one other quick thing, Jason, is this is what I always tend to think in my head, and I try to teach other people. I coach a lot of people internally at the consulting firm I work at, but I try to make sure that I'm not showing up as their crutch or their scapegoat. So what that means is that it puts me in a position to show up in that sense of being more discovery based with the way that I do things, and putting more of the onus on them to figure things out, where I take a true coaching stance. And I think that's something that is a little bit foreign to a lot of folks, especially here in extreme southern Canada that I live in.
Throw in the comments if you know what that means. But let's get going. So those travels, I was really after what's getting people and companies stuck and what's getting them unstuck, and what do change agents want? Because LinkedIn's not a real place. All the stuff that you see there is people trying to sell stuff or get eyeballs on content. I don't think it at all reflects reality of what people are faced with in their organizations and what change agents want. I've never met a change agent who wants a gigantic framework with all the steps required to ensure successful change. You might see some of this stuff on LinkedIn, but that's not what they want. They need a way to intervene in the system in a temporary context. And what I mean by that is, think of any organization you've worked for, and let's just say you characterize them as a control organization. They didn't get there with intentional planning. It happened over a series of interventions and a series of interactions between the people in the organization. The first time production went down for a company, what did we do? We implemented a bunch of rules. Okay, great. We're done with that. What happened the next time we ran into a problem? We implemented another set of rules. As we grew, what did we do? We added more and more stacks of hierarchy. So it happened through events over time. And then one day we woke up and we're like, wow, we can't get any work done. This isn't any good. We have to transform. So we try to intentionally do a big bang approach to transformation, as opposed to what's going to work, which is let's start to behave in a way that is opposite to the way that got us into this mess in the first place. So this is what change agents wanted. They're, change isn't going well. I have a stakeholder update meeting on Friday. What can I do about it? Right? They don't want a big framework. They don't want a big set of steps. And the patterns from all these, I actually had, 1,200 sticky notes or something like that I just manually affinity mapped, which that took a long time. And it distilled these 5 patterns. And it was, If you're familiar with John Cotter's 8 steps, step number 1, create urgency. So you can toss a yes, I know what that is in the chat. The challenge becomes urgency is really in the eye of the beholder. So what's urgent for shareholders is different than what's urgent for the leaders, which is different from the managers, and what's different from the people on the teams. And when we focus on urgency, we stress the system. It's just a word that invokes stress, and we already live in a pretty stressful time as it is, where humanity reaches to the top shelf word to create the most stress and anxiety. Look at any headline or any title. They're induced, they just create stress because they want eyeballs on your content. So this pattern was organizations that seemed to have a higher purpose. And it's never everybody, because, think of any large organization you've been part of or large change. Not everybody cares. It's probably a small subset are the movers, the people that really want to do something different. There's probably a handful of people who are actively or passively, quote, resisting, which we'll get into in a second. But the majority in the middle are people that are just kind of going along. They're like, whatever. I used to fill out these reports. Now I fill out those reports. So we don't have to get 100% of the people, quote, on board at the same time. But if we've got a stronger purpose to follow, as opposed to scaring people with urgency, we're going to be more likely to become adaptable. And the story from this organization was a healthcare organization. They were growing very quickly. I think when I was there, they were about 110 people or so, and they expected to double or even triple within a year. And they were kind of freaked out about it because, anybody who's worked for a startup and has gone through explosive growth knows how fast things can get chaotic if you don't have some kind of loose structure in place. And that's what they were worried about. They were worried about just it being the Wild West and not being able to get anything done because they would just constantly be reacting to how fast they were growing. So we did this Lego Serious Play exercise, and they realized their strength was knowing how to reinvent themselves when they needed to. So the little pile of Lego under the bottom here was all the things they've changed over the years. And the structure on top was the current structure that described what their organization was like. But they realized, their core strength was being able to reinvent themselves. And they also realized their purpose was different because they were in healthcare. They made software that helped people take care of the elderly. And that was really the thing that, kept their eye on the prize, to use a metaphor, for example. And after that session, they realized that, they didn't really need to do anything about this double or tripling in size right now. They knew when the time came, they knew how to do it because they had a stronger sense of purpose as opposed to just following, urgency or a plan. The next one is we've all heard about communications, right? You have to, what is it? You have to tell someone 21 times before they remember.
I think that's right. Jason. Yeah.
Yeah. You tell people, then what do you
21.
do? You tell them again, and then you tell them again. And yeah.
I know I don't like it when people say that, actually, because I question whether we're talking about people who are engaged or people who are just passively, kind of coming into work and collecting a check and going home.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what it makes me think about.
Yeah. So we want to engage people in dialogue, and this might sound kind of nitpicky. I know with communications folks, sometimes they read this and they're like, well, what we call communications is dialogue, but it's not really, right? We send information to people that's been carefully written and curated. And then we say we're open to questions for optics. If you've ever been on a town hall, for example, where the questions are scripted, that's not dialogue enhancing. That is optics and broadcasting information at people so it looks good. So the companies that I worked with where this one was born was they were not afraid to answer difficult questions. And the example would be This was up at Arlanda in Stockholm. You probably recognize the company by the colors on the picture there. We did 2-day facilitated summits every year, and then I would go back and forth, maybe every 6 months or so, and just do like retrospectives on how things were going. And we had the CEO and the CTO on stage. We were using a tool called Slido to ask questions anonymously. And one of the questions the first year was, when the CTO was on stage, you keep saying how we need to change. What are you prepared to change? Now, nobody is going to ask that question on a microphone if it's handed to them. I shouldn't say no one. I should say it's very unlikely that would happen, because, you don't want people asking questions that are negative. So all the questions were projected behind them. They were going up in real time. People were voting on their phones, and the CTO actually didn't duck the question. He answered it, because of course that one got voted straight to the top. And he talked about how he's a competitive sports player, and sometimes he gets too competitive and he tries to push and push when he should just sit back and wait. So it was a very authentic and genuine answer. And the CTO and the CEO were both saying things like, this is a generational transformation. This isn't a year-long or even a 5-year-long program, which was great. So the CEO would go on virtual road trips, I guess, because it was inside the company, and would just do open lean coffee sessions with, 30, 40 people at a time for 6 months. Pull information out of people. I can't help if I don't know what the problem is. So it was very much focused on creating dialogue. And then the slide that's up here was, we periodically put this up during those 2-day summits. What's working, what's not working. We had a big retrospective board, and none of it was hidden. It was all up there. And the goal was to get people talking about the problems that we have and what we're going to do to try to solve them. It was funny, the second year we did this, they actually had hired a comms person who wanted to curate the list. And it was hilarious, because the 23 of us or so that came back to facilitate again, I felt bad for this poor person, because her intention was good, but the whole team was primed, to let all of the dialogue come out, and that was foreign to her. So they're just like, no. One of the questions disappeared from the Slido the following year, and our group chat just went mental. Get that question back up there. And I felt so bad for this person. But the whole point was, leaders want bad news faster. They want the real story. They don't really want things sugar-coated and cleaned by the time it gets up to them in a status report. The third one, this one's fairly obvious. This has been a stance of lean change forever. So instead of just following the plan or executing the tasks, sometimes in change, our goal is to learn something, not necessarily to get something done. And we've been trained in the business world to always get an outcome or have a set of actions or stuff like that. But we don't really talk about the need to learn something. And when it comes to complex change, you can't really know how the change is going to affect the people in your organization until you start doing it. You might have some good theories, you might have some good intuition, you might have some past data that says, well, typically these types of things happen. But until you act on the system, you really don't know what's going to happen. So if we can have a conversation around, is our goal to produce a widget or get an outcome, or is it to learn something? And the faster we experiment, the faster we learn. And the companies, this picture here, this summit, we did a Lego Serious Play thing the second year with about 200 people. And that was the experiment to explore 3 problems that the company had. There were 3 main problems that were framed. And the experiment was, let's try something a little bit different. So instead of the leaders just telling people what the problems were, let's explore it with Lego Serious Play. And it was great. You can probably tell, well, maybe you can tell how old the story is by how blurry the picture is. This was the iPhone 3 days. And the context was they had a real problem with the build being broken all the time. So there were 16 teams, and they really didn't have a way to kind of untangle that mess. The tools are obviously a lot more sophisticated now than they were back then, but what would happen was somebody would check something in and it would break the build, and then everybody else would just check in, and it would just compound the mess because they had no kind of automatic build. They had no feedback in place at all. So we hooked up this siren. So anytime the build would break, it would send a radio signal to that siren. And it was just visual. It wasn't like a screaming siren. The light would go off. So that would signal to the build team that the build was broken. So they would immediately lock it, go through the logs, find out what the problem was, and use it as a training tool with the team, which was great. It wasn't used as a punishment. It was used as a, oh, here's what happened. How do we not have this problem again? And that was the experiment. So it wasn't, let's try to create some big process. Let's try to do this and that. Let's just put some early, what's the real problem? The problem is we find out too late. Great. What's an experiment we can do to work on that? The fourth one is always my favorite topic. We always blame resistors. We talk about how do we have to overcome resistance. But when you really think about it, what we see as change agents is just how people are reacting to a change in the environment. Again, Jerry Weinberg talked about this in his software quality series, like dating back to the 70s. Dale Emery talked about response over resistance in the early 90s, mid 90s. So people have been talking about this forever, but it's still more fun to blame people for resisting and try to overcome them, right? Because it makes us feel like a hero sometimes. And for me, that's valuable data. I would much rather have people be very upset about a change than to have apathy. Because if there's apathy, you have nothing. You have no data to go with. You don't know if people like the change, if people don't like the change. You have nothing to guide you into the next set of experiments. So when we don't see change moving forward, get curious, not furious. How can we find out what's really going on for people, knowing the reaction that we're getting is totally normal? This company, we did a retrospective with the managers, and we were kind of in that spot. It just seemed like the change was stalling. It wasn't really going anywhere. People weren't coming to like the transformation meetings and participating in all this kind of stuff. And we, my colleague Andrew, who was in that first picture that I showed you with UC, wrote this on the whiteboard. And what a great question. What are you tolerating? So, and it just led to probably one of the best conversations we had with that manager group. And all the stuff that came out, there was only one that was related to there was a couple related to the transformation. The pace of the transformation was too much. Transformation traction. But a lot of the things were just day-to-day things. Lunchtime meetings, because anybody who's worked in a busy organization, what happens, right? You always, the first thing to go is lunch. Maybe that's a North American thing, but a lot of the problems that we came up with was not at all related to the transformation, and it sort of reaffirmed with the managers there that we were there to help, which was the intention. So we weren't trying to blame them for not participating or resisting. We wanted to find out what's really going on, and that helped us create a different set of experiments and just reaffirm that we were there to help. The last one, another thing that's been a cornerstone of lean change is co-creation. I mean, we're not selling used cars. We don't need to get people to buy in. And the interesting thing is, when I talk to change people, you've probably talked to a million too, Ken, that say things like, how do I get my leaders bought into the change? And for me, it's like, then what are you working on? Like, why are you doing the things you're doing? Where's the change coming from? Is it just something you feel you should be doing and you're doing? But if the leaders aren't bought in, then what is the thing that it is that you're working on? So instead of trying to sell it like a used car, build the change with people. So the people, the people who write the plan don't fight the plan. Something Jill Forbes said, who I worked with when she was at a leasing company here in Canada. If you build it with the people, there's nothing to sell. you'll always focus on the right thing. So invite people to the party, ask them to dance, but let them opt out. So there's a couple of good quotes in the chat here. Resistance is good because you know people care. Yeah, exactly. Right. Resistance is data in a human system. Helps us learn and iterate on the change. Yep. Totally agree. Last story before we're going to get into the game is with co-creation. This was a company that the management team wanted their teams to go agile. So we did a little perspective map, and we looked at the top left is what's important from the perspective of the organization. The top right is what's important to the management team, and the bottom is what's important to our teams and people. So we did this facilitated activity, and we just looked at, you know, where are we aligned and where are we misaligned? And then before we did anything with that organization, it was now you have to take this information to the rest of the people in the organization and see what they think about it. Because what they thought was important to the teams and people might be different. So very simple thing to do, but it really gets people thinking, you know, well, why is this important to me as a manager? Probably because there's pressure from somewhere else. So everyone has a boss, right? Managers are getting pressure from their VPs to do something. VPs are getting pressure from the C-level. C-level's getting pressure from the board. So there's all these other dynamics that are going on, and that's what's sort of influencing our behavior to want to push change and sell it to people. And sometimes people confuse co-creation with asking people what they want. It's not what it is. It's facilitating a conversation to try to unpack what the problem is and how are we going to work together to fix it. So the last bit is really, it's all about balance, right? It's not black and white. It's not you have to do meaning log and you should stop doing communications. There's a time and a place to send people information and to deal with governance and compliance and those types of things. It's kind of like the manifesto, right? Like the left side of the manifesto, it never said, do this, don't do that. It said, there's some value in the stuff on the right, but we value the things on the left more. It's kind of the same idea. So we value finding, except mine's backwards, we value the things on the right, the meaningful dialogue. Guess I can change that. There we go. We value the things on the left more. Let's put the teeter-totter up here. Yep, there we go. All fixed. See? Transformation in real time. So yeah. Each of these 5 have philosophies. So in order to move towards co-creation, for example, there's 7 philosophies that might help guide you with how you get to action. And that's really what the game is about. So when you think of whatever problem or whatever context we have, because that's the hardest thing about this game in a public meetup, is we all have different contexts. So we're just going to have to make something up. We're just going to have to assume that I think we're going to use breakout groups, right? Because there's enough people that we're going to do this in groups. Maybe 3 groups, I think. Where'd Miko go? So we're going to, you can think of your own context, or we can just make up a generic one. And typically what I use is just imagine we're a group of people on a change team. Like maybe that's an agile coaching team, maybe it's a change management team or an organizational change team. And we're working on a digital transformation or some type of transformative change, and it's not going well. So we want to play this game so we can try to figure out what to do next. So you can start from just that simple context, and then we'll get into the game. So Hugo.
Jason and Ken, you're gonna have the workshop here in Finland. Do you wanna have a introduction about it, how it works, what it's gonna be?
Sure. Where is Ken? I don't see him. It's I put the link in the chat. It's the 6 big ideas. So the 5 universals is one of those 6 big ideas, and the workshop is Beyond Frameworks. So it's a 2-day workshop where we go into each of these 6, and it's very much an experience. So you will bring context and problems, and we will use these 6 big ideas to help you unravel those problems. And we have it tentatively scheduled for, I think, the last week of May 22nd and 23rd. It'll be somewhere in the city center, to be determined. So once we have enough interest, then we will make it a reality. And if there isn't enough interest, we will do it virtually as well, just in case. So trying to cover all bases. But Ken's been actually, what's today? Tomorrow. I think, where did he go? You want to jump in, Ken? Because you're starting it tomorrow. You're starting the transformative change one tomorrow.
Yeah, so there's a leading transformative change workshop as well. That is a longer workshop that is about 16 contact hours. That one dives at a much broader, kind of deeper scope about all these ideas and how to help an organization start to become more adaptable and modernize itself in ways that it may not be able to handle complexity-based circumstances now. So we use this 6 big ideas in that, and plus a lot of other things. Whereas the Beyond Frameworks one, we're going to come over there and do virtually. It's going to be a little bit narrower, and it's going to specifically address just the 6 big ideas plus the vortex of behavioral patterns. So similar but different out of those 2, the workshop and then the Beyond Frameworks sense-making session. If any of that made sense, just talking about it verbally in an abstract way.
So
I mean, we can definitely show pictures if we need to, but yeah.
Yeah. So it's these 6 ideas. So we talk about pattern recognition and transformative change. So we tend to see transformational change as a year-long program, and then we decide we don't like the consultants we hired, so we bring in another group that does the same thing, and we get into this transformation treadmill of just doing the same thing over and over again. So the 5 waves is how we can recognize and break those patterns. The 5 universals we've gone through here. This is really about how I show up and interact in the system and what I can change about myself. The 5 levers, we tend to focus on structure and technologies and processes because they're easy. Think of how many times you've worked on a transformative change where we're going to bring in a new system instead, or we're going to change a process. We're not doing waterfall anymore, we're doing agile, or we're not doing Kanban anymore, we're doing Scrum. Those are easy to do. But this one, we talk about the intended and unintended consequences and how we can focus on more meaningful change. Do you want to describe the 3 agilities?
Yeah, the 3 agilities are really trying to get you to realize that agility is an attribute of the characteristics of individuals. And then collectively of the organizational system or a particular context. And in there, the reason why there's 3, not just 1, is that we can't just focus on frameworks. That only helps us in one of the 3 agilities, which is delivery agility. Like, how do we actually ship things out if we're building software, or if we're building more tactile things, then, how do we manufacture something in a way and then get it shipped out quicker? But that happens inside of a system, and that system needs leadership agility, the ability to distribute information and decision making, and change agility, the idea to then actually act on that information and decision making process to help the system evolve and adapt over time. Those 2 things lead to your ability to have delivery agility. And yet, I think the agile industry specifically has really kind of only focused on the frameworks or the delivery agility part. And this is why we struggle to really see kind of transformative change in organizations, because we're only focused on frameworks.
You can keep going.
Oh, okay.
With the two strategies?
Yeah, the two change strategies. So this one helps us understand at kind of a higher level, well, what is it that we're really trying to change? Are we trying to make things faster or cheaper, given what we are currently doing and the way we're currently thinking? Because that would be optimization. Like, hey, we do it this way now, and that hasn't worked for us. But we'd like to make this either faster or cheaper. Okay, optimization, great. If that's the focus, then okay, let's make sure we're working in ways that help you optimize. But if we're finding out that as we iterate through that optimization, it's still not working, which, by the way, most companies mainly try to optimize things, then we need to start to consider what the effect would be if we start to evolve our thinking. So how do we actually think about our system, our organizational system, and the systems it sets in? And then how do we think about the problems in that system in a way that are more evolved than the way we think about them currently, which hasn't helped us solve these problems or these challenges or pain points. So it really tries to help people think through and strategize about what it is they're trying to change and how they're trying to change it and what they're willing to tolerate. What risk are they willing to take on? Because evolutionary change obviously causes some amount of risk. And so they need to understand it, whether they're going to be tolerant of that level of risk or not, or whether they just want to stick to optimization and continue to struggle if it's not working for them.
I always like to use the doing agile versus being agile debate, where it seems to be binary. It's you can't do agile, you have to be agile. The two strategies is about you need both. So sometimes optimizing a process is the best idea right now. That's why you can see this little gray line, this gray squiggly line is kind of your transformational journey, if you will. You can see sometimes it's more vertical, sometimes it's more horizontal. So sometimes optimizing a process is good, but we reach a point where we can't optimize it anymore. And we have to think about the work differently. So we actually need both. It's not be agile or do agile. It's we need a little bit of both depending on what the context needs and what the people can sustain. The 4 dimensions, this was very closely related to the 5 universals, in the sense that there's ideas, tools, and practices and concrete things we can apply in organizations, but we forget about the art side, which is us as humans and the stance we take. I know I've made this mistake. I've gone into an organization with a coaching stance when they really needed a mentor. So we were kind of misaligned. My stance was not the right stance for the current context. And sometimes it's been the opposite, where I might have come in as a teacher or a mentor or an advisor when they really needed a coach. So it's the combination of these 4 things. And a very short story, I went to a traditional change management conference many years ago, and they wanted to do an open space to start it. And I think we all know what an open space is at this point. The way they did it was the person went on stage and said, here's the 4 topics. Area 1, you will talk about this. Area 2, you will talk about that. And anybody who knows what an open space is knows that's the complete opposite to what an open space is. So it doesn't mean that, they didn't know how to do it. It meant their stance was, we have to control this, because if it's too loose and a bad experience and nobody brings topics, we're going to get in trouble by the board for having a bad conference. So we need to control it. So we're all making those choices in context with what our stance is, who we are, experiences we've had in the past, and that influences how we apply tools and practices. And that was all 6. So our team picked leadership perspective in our group. So here's an example of how we would piggyback these 6 big ideas on the Topaasia game. So we have, we picked the leadership perspective, and that one is aligned to purpose over urgency. That's the bucket that card is in. So what I might think about is, okay, the leader's perspective, I might pull this out and I might frame a conversation. There's that might word again. I might frame a conversation around trying to discover if they're just after optimization or if they're after evolution, so more meaningful change. So I would facilitate a conversation or an activity with the leadership team to try to figure out what it is that they're trying to do, because there's a difference between their perspective and the perspective of the people on the teams. So if I discover that their intent is to optimize, that might change which lever I work on. And I would frame a conversation around, okay, if you want optimization, that means you want to optimize a process. Here's the consequence of ignoring the other dimensions. Here's things that might happen, intended and unintended consequences. Is this still the course of action you want to take? Do you want to optimize the processes and see what problems happen as a result, or knowing that it's going to be maybe at odds with your structure or your strategy? But it gives us a different frame to have those conversations, so we can be more intentional about the change we want to make.
I think that's a word now. Yeah.
Yeah, it has to be. The coffee's wearing off. Sorry.
Yeah.
What was your top card, Ken, from your group? Do you remember?
Oh gosh. We had 3 votes on one of them, and I'm trying to remember which one it was. You remember?
Yeah,
what else?
yeah. In the votes, the votes got accept, failure, approach, and then conversations, pace of change. But also the approach to change and viral change got the kind of the most votes in this kind of our one voting. So what many times came up was the accept, failure, and approach to change and viral change.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Did I answer your question?
Yeah.
Yes.
So in those cases, like the 5 levers would come in really handy here. So let's talk about the pace of change and the viral change. So if the organization is of the mentality, like the leaders, they hold all the information at the top of the organization, and where the information is where the decisions are made. And so that means that the decisions are made at the top, and they'll go in the back room, or they'll go to an annual retreat, and they'll make a bunch of strategic decisions for the year. And then what comes out of that is essentially they're dropping change down through the organization from that point forward for that next year. And what they're doing is they're sacrificing the people lever of the 5 levers, because they didn't do any kind of meaningful dialogue. They didn't do any kind of co-creation of that change with them. They're essentially just dropping change on everyone's head and hoping that they're going to buy into it and that it's going to be effective. And I think we've all seen that story, and it doesn't generally work out well over the long term. So there are also the things that they may be changing, and if they're sacrificing people, they may be focusing more so on the things that are easier to change, which is the right side of the 5 levers. Because we can swap out process all day long, and there's minimal disruption comparatively to, let's say, changing structure of an organization, which is reporting lines and policies and procedures and written and unwritten rules inside of their organization. Those things are much harder to change. There's a greater impact. There's more risk to those things. I would say the same thing about strategy. To shift a company's strategy, depending on the size of the company we're talking about, can be very difficult. It takes a lot of time. So the things on the left of the 5 levers are really kind of difficult to change. So they're rarely changed in most organizations. And the things on the right, process and technology, tend to be a little easier, especially technology. It's very malleable. We can swap out and change software all day long with minimal risk to it. Not always. Obviously, there's risk to some software changes, but in the sense of change to the human being, if I just have to go to a different screen and click a button, it's really not all that consequential to me as an individual or my day-to-day work. But the lever that would be the most impactful is people, and it's the one that therefore is the most ignored. People are messy. People are difficult. People are complex. So we generally work that out of the equation in most organizations to begin with. I mean, I don't know, maybe that's not so over in the Scandinavian countries, but certainly in the North American countries, I think we see that a lot.
Mm-hmm. And talking a little bit more about why we use the word might a lot, because context matters. And cultures are different, exactly like Ken said, right? If you tried co-creation in, say, South America, or a country with a tall power distance index difference, co-creation I won't say it won't work, but it would have a harder time working than it would in the Nordic countries because there's a much shorter power distance index between the leaders. And obviously that's not true in 100% of the cases. You might find a telecom or a bank is more conservative, more traditional, has more hierarchy, might want to go through the chain of command. But generally speaking, you may be able to have more open, honest conversations in Scandinavia as opposed to, say, in South America, right? Like you could openly challenge a leader in a respectful way. Whereas in South America, or maybe India, maybe China, like countries that have more complex and tall power distance index and social structures, you might not be able to get away with that. So how you apply these 6 big ideas will depend on all of those factors, which is why we call it beyond frameworks, right? Because you could go and apply the framework somewhere and have it not work at all. And it's like, that framework is dumb, it doesn't work. Well, not necessarily. It means there was something off about the approach, given the context.
Yeah. I don't know if you all have ever worked at a company, or maybe you're working at a company now or with a company now that takes a framework, let's say even in the agile world like Scrum, and especially when they first find it, although I don't think this is so much anymore because I think Scrum is fairly ubiquitously understood at this point, for good or bad. But they'll come across a new idea like, hey, Scrum, great, okay, we're gonna roll this out across our entire organization all at once. Even our support teams, in IT, who are handling essentially a first in, first out kind of situation with their work, and their work can't really be planned. It's very ad hoc, and somehow those teams are told they have to do sprints, and they've got to have a scrum master, and wow, a disaster just ensues after that. Just a ton of resistance and a lot of arguing. I've been there. Can you feel the wounds?
Yeah.
I think now is a good time for questions from the audience. Do you have questions that comes to your minds for Ken and Jason about the workshop what's going to happen in May in Finland? So please, now is good time for any questions.
There was this one question from Ken, the small group company. Some thoughts about setting timeline for change. I just put it to the chat because that was in the post-it note, but I don't. Have you Jason and Ken, any thoughts on that perspective?
In the change world, in the traditional change management world, if you want to call it that, they separate project management from change management. I think those are all snarled together, but there is a reality of somebody is paying for the change team's time to do something. So you need to do some work in that area, but move to a pull-based system. So try to flip the conversation towards how much money are you willing to spend to work on this problem? So that gives you an idea of, well, it's like Scrum, right? Scope is always the variable. So it's the same in change. So you can use the 6 big ideas to explore, like, what is this change? Is it implementing a new system? Is it compliance or regulatory related? Is it people transformation? And start to have the conversation that way, but recognize there's always the realities of budgets and schedules and reporting and stuff like that. That shouldn't drive the change. The change should drive the change, but those logistical things are going to be something that needs some attention.
I think Victoria had a question on her mind, right?
Yes, I was just going to type it. Is there an online version of this training for people who can be in Helsinki on the 22nd?
Yeah.
I'll say yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so it depends on which thing you're talking about. So for the Beyond Frameworks, which is there's 7 sense-making sessions, and virtually outside of the one we're offering in May, we generally will offer those as individual 7 sessions, and each session is about 90 minutes. Although the very first one I think is 2 hours, but the other 6 are 90 minutes. Each one of those sessions deals with one of the 6 big ideas. And the first session deals with the vortex of behavioral patterns, which is a larger, more in-depth conversation, which is why it's an extra 30 minutes. We offer that generally a couple times a year. So just check on the leanchange.org website and look for that particular course, the Beyond Frameworks course. And then, yeah, anybody could sign up for it there, regardless.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the reason why we were going to do it in person was there was an opportunity to hit 3 different countries while we were over there. So there was a company in Sweden that wanted to do something for a day, and then there was the Agile Estonia conference, the Global Agile Summit. So we were going to bounce between the 3 different countries. But if virtual works better, I mean, I haven't been back to Finland in like 5 years. I'd love to come back again. Because I used to go quite regularly. If in person doesn't happen, we'll switch this probably to a virtual one. Because everything, as you all know, everything's twice as expensive post-COVID. Like travel is twice as expensive. Finding a place is twice as expensive. So if we don't get enough in-person interest for this, we'll switch it to a remote one.
I must say I participated, Jason, your session, I think it was 2018, Lean Change Agent.
Mm-hmm.
That was organized by 𝐴. So everybody, if you can make it on site, I would recommend it. That was a really good one and really interactive. And I don't think we sat down a lot. We were on our feet and doing exercises all the time. And it really gave a lot. So I will try to make it there as well. I'm not sure about the dates, but I would really recommend this workshop for anybody.
Oh, awesome. Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, it was a good time. We had champagne and everything there. It was great. Good food, good conversations, and good drinks.
Yep.
What else do you need?
There came 2 also like Mikko said that the big ideas framework is great. How do you usually gather the ideas in practice? And then Sami also offered a place to sleep at the home office.
Yeah. The
Good
kids are
guest
old enough too,
mattress.
so they probably sleep through the night now, so you don't have to worry about young children.
Yeah.
You want to take the ideas in practice one, Ken?
Yeah, I'm just collecting my thoughts here to see how to best talk about it. So 2 things. One, I'll say that back to what I said at the beginning of the call, which is I generally take a very discovery-based approach. Discovery-based meaning that I try in those situations when I'm using the 6 big ideas to not bias where we're going and why we're going there. And I also try to show up in a coaching stance so that I let the people who are actually involved in the problem or the situation come to their own conclusions. So you can use any of the ideas in whatever context you need, just choose the right one. The second thing I'll say about it is that there's an actual workshop that teaches you how to do this. That's the Leading Transformative Change workshop that actually starts tomorrow. So I know that's really close, and so I doubt anybody would want to sign up for that. And it might not be a good time for the time zones that are that far east. But we will schedule another one most likely in June or July. And so I should be able to get that one in the books or on the schedule probably within the next couple of weeks. And so that same link we put in for the training link, or it looks like actually Jason put in the link. Which link is that you put in, Jason? Is that the Beyond Frameworks?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm talking about the workshop, the Leading Transformative Change workshop. And so that one's the longer, 16-hour workshop. That one teaches you how to do things. So does that answer, Mikko? Does that help? Am I close to answering your question?
It's close. I was just thinking like if you use tools like Figma or just Post-its or something, how do you actually then gather the ideas from the people?
Yeah.
Facilitated conversations for me.
Yeah.
So one, the Topaasia game, for sure. If I think that's the right thing we should be using. Otherwise, it's the same as any conversation with stakeholders or teams. It's designing a facilitated workshop and some activities based on which idea I think is the right one to unpack this problem. but it becomes
Mhm.
very dynamic. So it's like you have to be prepared to do all 7, like the 6 big ideas plus the vortex, because you don't know where the
Right.
conversation is going to go. So it
Mm.
can be a little more stressful at the beginning.
Well, and I think that's the thing. It's what I have really tried to become much better at in the past, 5 or 6 years since I've really been focusing on this, is that to have the patience to hold that unknowing and the uncertainty in the moment without feeling the need to be like, hey, this is how it works. By the way, you just need to do this, or hey, here's this idea. This is going to help you figure it out. And here, basically essentially telling them with some amount of expertise instead of coaching. So to get better at that, I think is where it starts. And then the other parts will start to come naturally. You'll start to learn the models. You'll start to figure out which model works better for which situation and what context. And then it's just kind of a natural instinct to be able to kind of flow between them to talk about, whatever challenges are coming up in a way to help the person who's on the other side of the conversation understand their own context without telling them exactly what their problem is. Jason and I had this title we were going to use in our first book, but I think it might work its way into the second book. But it kind of tongue in cheek, this idea of like, we were like, what the hell is your problem? As a way to say, like, look, everybody's got a problem. We just don't know what that problem is. And we'll never know what the problem is, what your problem is. We'll never understand it in the way that you do. So we can't possibly tell you how to fix your problem. We can only set ideas in front of you that are going to help you better understand your problem so that you know how to then address it through an iterative kind of experimental way. And that's what all these ideas are about.
Hey,
With all these ideas and needs these frameworks, so it's very useful to have that, for example, those ideas that you have.
I think we're kind of end of our time now. And if you want to have more conversation about the topics or subjects we're talking now, the workshop is coming, and also the online courses, they're coming as well. And we're gonna add the links to the email, what we're gonna send after this webinar. I think we're gonna send it Friday or next week's Monday. So the links will be there and more info about the workshops. And I think it was a good session. Jason and Ken, you were good. And there were good questions from the audience. I think you answered some of them correctly and something left in the air, like it usually does. So do you have something like a final words for the people who are still at the webinar?
Kiitos.
Ole.
All right. Thank you, everybody, and see you later, I hope.
Yeah. Thanks.
Have a nice evening. Bye-bye.
See ya.
Kiitos kaikille.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks.